Hi guys, welcome to our daily encounter. Today we read about Samson being captured by the Philistines and being thrown into prison, having his eyes gouged, and then eventually being brought out to entertain the Philistines when they gathered together to for the sake of their god Dagon. And while he's there, he prays to the Lord for strength enough to destroy those Philistines. There were about 3,000 in attendance there. And the Lord gives him strength, and he's able to push down the pillars that he was leaning against. In doing so, the whole house fell and killed 3,000 Philistines. And we're told that he killed more in his death than he did in his entire life. And as we think about this story, we could reflect on how it is that Samson did this. You know, Samson was highly outnumbered, 3,000 to 1. And yet he killed all of his enemies in that one final moment. And of course, ultimate credit goes to the Lord. Of course, the Lord was the one who gave him the strength to knock down the pillars, which would cause the building to collapse and kill all of those Philistines. But we could look at some things that was on Samson's side, that from Samson's standpoint, that he did that allowed this to take place. And it's basically two things that Samson had in place that had either one of these things not been in place, he would not have been able to destroy his enemies. For one, Samson trusted in the Lord for his strength. And then secondly, he didn't love his life, even to the point of death. These are the two things that he had going for him. He went to the Lord in prayer and prayed to the Lord that he would give him the strength. He recognized the fact that he didn't have strength in and of himself. His hair had been cut. Yes, it had grown back to a certain extent, but still he had to trust in the Lord. He realized in order to receive and to gain his strength back. And so he trusted in the Lord for his strength. And then secondly, he didn't love his life even to the point of death. That is, he was willing to die. He was willing to die with those Philistines in order to seek vengeance against them and to render vengeance against them. But he didn't love his life even to the point of death. Now, had he just trusted in the Lord for his strength and not loved his life unto death, perhaps he would have received the strength, but then not really used that strength to knock down the pillars because he wouldn't want to die. And therefore, the strength would have been given to him, but not really utilized. So that wouldn't have worked. Or it could have been that he did, or that he was willing to die with the Philistines, but didn't trust in the Lord to receive the strength. And so without the strength, of course, then he could knock down the pillars and destroy the Philistines. It took both of these things working together. Him trusting in the Lord for strength, and then also him being willing to die. These two things together gave him victory over his enemies. And of course, we could say the same thing for ourselves. If we want to overcome our spiritual enemies, we too have to we have to have these two things in place. And of course, once again, we have to emphasize the fact that ultimately God receives the credit because he's the one that gives us the victory. But from our standpoint, these are two things that we put into place in order to work in cooperation with God in accordance to this. We're told in Ephesians chapter 6 that we do have enemies that are against us. In Ephesians 6 and verse 10, starting in verse 10, it says, "Finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. Put on the full armor of God so that you will be able to stand firm against the schemes of the devil. For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the powers, against the world forces of this darkness, against the spiritual forces of wickedness in the heavenly places." And so you could say that just as Samson was outnumbered 3,000 to 1, there before the Philistines, we too are outnumbered. When you think about the spiritual enemies that we have, if we're just thinking about, of course, ourselves. But we have a formidable enemy, just as Samson did as well. And so we have to respond the way that Samson did. First off, we have to trust in the Lord for our strength. We have to be there in Ephesians 6 and verse 10. It says, finally be strong in the Lord and in the strength of his might. So we have to trust in the Lord and in the strength of his might, not in ourselves. Left to ourselves, we are very weak. We are very vulnerable. We're very exposed to the enemy's attack. But when we stand in the Lord and we stand strong in the Lord, we trust in the strength of his might, we have the strength to withstand the fiery darts of the evil one, the schemes of the devil, all of these things. And so that's one of the things that we must do. But we also must not love our lives even unto death. And we're told that this is how the saints overcome the serpent of old, that is the devil, in Revelation chapter 12. It says in verse 11, and they overcame him because of the blood of the Lamb and because of the word of their testimony, and they did not love their life even when faced with death. And so we have to have that also at play in our lives if we want to overcome the enemy. That is, we can't be living for ourselves. We can't be living a selfish life, a life that is so concerned about preserving self and concerned with really just playing to self with comforts and pleasures and trying to preserve what we have. If we're living that type of lifestyle, we leave ourselves vulnerable to the enemy. But when we say, you know what, Christ is all, and I give Christ all, and we completely and absolutely surrender to Christ, and we take up our cross and follow him and deny ourselves, that gives us victory over the enemy. When we can say, I would even give up my life for Christ, and even everything less than that, then the enemy doesn't have a foothold. Then the enemy doesn't have a means by which to gain the upper ground. And so we, like Samson, must do these two things. We must trust in the Lord for our strength, but then we also must not love our lives, even when faced with death. We should love the Lord all the way up to death. And in doing so, we can overcome and have victory against the enemy. And of course, it's the Lord who gives us the strength and the ability to do this, but we trust in him all the way. And in doing so, we can have victory just like Samson did. So these are some things we can reflect on and think about as we do our reading today. With that, guys, I do thank you for watching the video today. Hope you guys have a great day. Love you guys. God bless.